Imagine waking up rich, not comfortable, rich, and by lunch, you're poor. Not because you lost your job, not because the market crashed, because the money itself stopped meaning anything. That's not a hypothetical. That's a Tuesday in Berlin, 1923. A woman in Berlin sells everything she owns to buy a single loaf of bread. Not because she's poor, because she waited until the afternoon. That morning, the same loaf cost half as much. By evening, prices will rise again. They always do, sometimes twice a day. Workers get paid at lunch and run, not walk, to the nearest store because every hour their money sits in their pocket, it's worth less. This isn't a thought experiment. This happened. Germany, 1923. And the reason it happened is more useful to you right now than almost anything else you'll learn about money this year. Because the question isn't really, how did Germany survive hyperinflation? The question is, what actually gives money its value in the first place? And once you see how easily that value can vanish, you start noticing the same warning signs everywhere. In currencies today, in debts governments keep printing their way out of, in the quiet assumption that the cash in your wallet will be worth the same thing tomorrow. It usually is, until it isn't. So let's go back to where it fell apart. And more importantly, how an entire country clawed its way back from the edge of monetary collapse. Start with a number that sounds fake but isn't. In January 1919, $1 bought about 9 German marks. By November 1923, $1 bought 4.2 trillion marks. Trillion. With AT. People didn't carry wallets anymore. They carried suitcases, wheelbarrows, laundry baskets, just to buy groceries. There are photographs of children stacking banknotes like building blocks, because the paper was worth more as a toy than as currency. Restaurants stopped printing prices on menus. By the time your soup arrived, the price had already changed. Here's the part most people get wrong. They assume the German government lost control of the printing press by accident. Some bureaucratic mistake. A money supply that spiraled out of nowhere. It wasn't an accident. It was a decision. To understand why, you have to go back further to the end of World War I. Germany lost, and the Treaty of Versailles didn't just take territory, it handed Germany a bill. A reparations bill so large that economists still argue about whether it was mathematically possible to pay it at all. Germany had two honest options: raise taxes brutally to pay the debt, which would crush its own population and likely trigger revolution, or default outright and risk foreign occupation. There was a third option, the dishonest one: print money to cover the gap. So that's what they did. At first, it worked almost. Printing money is a bit like turning up the volume on a speaker that's already distorting. For a while, it just sounds louder. Government bills got paid. Workers got wages. Nobody panicked. But money isn't wealth. It's a claim on wealth. And when you create trillions of new claims without creating any new bread, coal, or steel to back them, you haven't made the country richer. You just made each claim worth less. This is the part that sounds like an academic definition, but it's really just common sense once you strip away the jargon. Imagine a small village with exactly 100 loaves of bread and 100 coins in circulation. Each coin buys one loaf. Simple. Now, imagine the village council prints 900 more coins, but the bakery still only makes 100 loaves. You haven't created more bread. You've created more competition for the same bread. Prices don't rise because bread became more valuable. Prices rise because the coins became less valuable. That's it. That's the entire mechanism behind hyperinflation, stripped of the textbook language. Germany didn't have an inflation problem. Germany had a confidence problem that expressed itself through inflation. And once people stop believing a currency holds value, the death spiral isn't gradual. It's exponential. Because the moment workers suspect their wages will be worth less tomorrow, they don't save. They spend immediately. That extra spending pushes prices up faster, which makes everyone even more certain they need to spend immediately, which pushes prices up faster still. By late 1923, prices were doubling roughly every 2 days. Let that sit for a second. Not every 2 years. Not every 2 months. Every 2 days. Here's where it gets almost absurd. Workers in some factories were paid twice a day, morning and afternoon, because waiting until evening meant their wages might lose a third of their value. Bartering came back. Eggs for shoes, coal for childcare. The most advanced industrial economy in continental Europe had partially reverted to a trading post economy. Not because people were primitive, but because paper money had become a worse store of value than literal eggs. And here's the quiet irony buried inside all of this chaos. Debtors loved it. If you owed money before the crisis, hyperinflation was the best thing that ever happened to you. A mortgage that once felt crushing could be paid off with what amounted to pocket change, because the currency itself had collapsed in value. Meanwhile, anyone holding savings, anyone who had done everything right, watched their life savings evaporate into nothing. Pensioners, widows, the cautious, irresponsible, they were the ones who got destroyed. Hyperinflation doesn't punish the reckless. It punishes the people who trusted the system. So how does a country come back from this? How do you fix a currency that the entire population has stopped believing in? You don't fix the old currency. You kill it and replace it with something people are forced to trust again. In late 1923, Germany introduced a new currency called the Rentenmark. And the genius of it wasn't really economic, it was psychological. The Rentenmark wasn't technically backed by gold. Germany didn't have enough gold left for that. Instead, it was backed by something almost theatrical, a claim on German land and industrial assets. Real estate and factories used as collateral on paper. Did this actually create new tangible value overnight? Not really. What it created was a story people could believe. A reason to trust the new bills weren't going to be printed into worthlessness like the last ones. And the second move was the one that actually mattered. The government stopped printing money to cover its deficits. They capped the new currency supply. They committed, publicly and credibly, to discipline. That's the part that gets lost in most retellings. The Rentenmark wasn't magic. It was a promise, and for a promise to work, people have to believe the person making it will keep it. Almost overnight, hyperinflation stopped. Not slowed down, stopped. Within weeks, prices stabilized. The economy that had been in free fall found solid ground. Here's the uncomfortable truth hiding underneath that success story. Germany didn't survive hyperinflation by becoming wealthier. They survived it by becoming credible. The actual physical resources of the country, the coal, the factories, the workers hadn't changed in those few weeks between the old currency and the new one. What changed was belief, which means the entire 1923 crisis, top to bottom, was never really a story about coal or factories or gold reserves. It was a story about trust and what happens to a society the moment trust in its money breaks. Now here's where the story usually gets wrapped up neatly with a tidy little bow. Hyperinflation ended, stability returned, Germany rebuilt. Happy ending. Except it wasn't an ending. It was a setup, because here's what most people never connect. The trauma of 1923 didn't just teach Germans to fear inflation. It rewired an entire generation's relationship with money, debt, and government promises. Savings had been wiped out. The middle class, the group that's supposed to stabilize a democracy, had just watched their financial security get vaporized through no fault of their own. And into that vacuum of trust, just a decade later, walked a political movement promising order, certainty, and someone to blame. This is the part economics textbooks tend to skim past, and historians spend entire careers on. The hyperinflation of 1923 didn't just damage Germany's economy. It damaged Germans' faith in institutions, in markets, in the idea that playing by the rules protects you. And that wound didn't heal on its own. It got exploited. So zoom out. Really zoom out. What actually happened in Germany wasn't an isolated freak accident of history. It's a pattern that shows up whenever a government faces debt it cannot honestly pay and chooses the printing press over the harder choices. It happened in Zimbabwe. It happened in Venezuela. It's happened, to lesser degrees, in arguments happening right now about government deficits, debt ceilings, and central bank independence in major economies you'd never expect to compare to Weimar Germany. Not because those countries are about to repeat 1923 exactly, They almost certainly won't. The specific conditions were extreme. But the underlying mechanism, the temptation to solve a debt problem by quietly making the currency worth less, never fully goes away. It's just a question of degree. And that's really the uncomfortable thing sitting at the center of this entire story. Money only works as long as enough people agree to believe in it. Not gold, not government decree, belief. Germany in 1923 is proof of how fast that belief can collapse, and proof that it can be rebuilt, but only through real discipline and a credible promise that's actually kept. So here's the question worth sitting with. Every currency in the world today, including the one in your pocket right now, runs on that same fragile agreement. Belief, backed by trust, backed by the assumption that the people in charge won't do what Germany's government did in 1919. The question isn't whether that trust could ever break again. It's whether you notice the cracks before everyone else does, or after,